beef noodle skillet. If there is one recipe I know will always be a hit, it's this one. I've just been cooking some onion and garlic in a little bit of butter, and the onions are getting nice and soft. So this is a good time to add the ground beef. Just a pound of ground chuck, and I'll add some salt and pepper. And then I'm gonna turn the heat up and just crumble this beef and cook it until it's totally browned. This recipe actually has a funny history. One time when the kids were all small, I said, let's go to the grocery store and you guys can pick whatever you want for me to make you for dinner. And you know what they picked? I'm not gonna name any names. They picked the box that comes with a seasoning packet and a bag of noodles. You know what I'm talking about. You add it to ground beef. So I've been trying to make a good homemade version of the box mix ever since. I think ground beef is one of the best proteins when it comes to budget-friendly cooking. If you have teenagers to cook for or a big family, you can buy packs of ground beef and it doesn't break the bank. Okay, that is totally browned. So I'm gonna add a good spoonful of tomato paste. The tomato paste just adds a little bit of richness to the sauce. So I'm just smushing it around on the skillet, mixing it in with the beef. And then remember that box product I told you about? One of the cool things about it is you put the noodles in without even cooking them first. So I'm putting egg noodles, 12 ounces, into the skillet. Now for the liquid, I'm gonna add about 2.5 cups of low sodium beef stock. And then I'll add a teaspoon of smoked paprika, a good squeeze of grainy brown mustard. Trust me, this is all gonna make sense before too long. A few dashes of Worcestershire sauce. Then I'm gonna add a little more pepper because the noodles and the beef definitely need it. I'm gonna stir it, and then I want the noodles to have enough liquid to cook. So I'm gonna add some hot water, about a cup to start. And while it's cooking, if it looks like it needs more, I can splash in a little bit more. And then stir it and make sure all those spices are worked in. So I'm going to reduce the heat to low, and I'll put the lid on, and I'll just let it simmer for 12 minutes, stirring it a couple of times along the way. Okay. It's time for the big reveal. Let's see what happened in here. Oh, it looks wonderful. Now you can totally serve it as it is now. It's pretty much finished, but I like to add just a little bit of creaminess. So I'll add some sour cream, and how much you add is totally up to you. It just depends on how creamy you want things to get. And just a splash or two of cream. It's sort of a stroganoff idea, but more budget friendly. And then I like to chop up some chives and just sprinkle them over the top. They make it a little bit prettier, and they sure add some good flavor. All right, chives go on. It's nothing fancy, but boy, is it delicious. I'm making skillet spaghetti and meatballs. It's a delicious classic, lots of pasta, lots of meat, and it's baked in the oven. It is gonna be so good. I'm starting on the meat mixture for the meatballs, and it's just ground chuck with some minced garlic, and then 1/3 cup of Parmesan cheese, 1/3 cup of seasoned Italian breadcrumbs, and then a little bit of cream and some beaten egg. To season it, I'm just gonna add some salt and pepper, and then some finely minced oregano. And then I'll just go in with my hands. Lad and I actually don't really emphasize our birthdays very much, with the exception of last year. I turned 50 and he threw a big surprise birthday party for me. I've never had a surprise birthday thrown for me. I was a little bit shocked. I wouldn't have thought I would want a surprise party, but I wound up having the best time. Now, if I were to do that for Lad, I don't know how he would react. He does not like surprises. He doesn't like big parties thrown for himself. He's kind of a quiet cowboy. He doesn't like a lot of attention. So a birthday, just the two of us, is the perfect way for him to celebrate. All right, this is all smushed together. And I'm gonna pinch a pretty generous amount. I'm making pretty big meatballs. Okay, I got it all smoothed out. So that's one meatball, and I'm gonna make 9 more just like it. I'll put them on a sheet pan first. The next step is to get them into a skillet and brown them in a 1/4 cup of olive oil. You have to turn the meatballs so they cook evenly and give them an occasional shake. It takes about 5 minutes. Don't these meatballs look amazing? They're so brown around the edges. They're not quite cooked all the way through, but they will have plenty of opportunity to do that. So I'm gonna move the meatballs to the edges of the pan and move forward with the sauce ingredients. In the center, I'll scrape in some diced onion and some more oregano and more garlic. So there's oregano and garlic in the meatballs themselves, as well as the sauce. This is Lad's idea of the perfect meal. He loves pasta, loves Italian food, loves cheese, and that is why I love Lad. We have a lot in common when it comes to the things that we like to eat. I'm a little more adventurous than he is, but what do you expect from a woman who's 2 weeks more mature than her husband? Okay, the onions, garlic, and oregano have been sauteing. They're already starting to get soft. So I'm gonna add a whole can of crushed tomatoes right in the center. And Lad and I can both handle a little spice in our life. In fact, at our advanced age, we need a little excitement here and there. Just kidding, we're young little sprites. And then I'm gonna add some water just to help make it saucy. I'm gonna crank up the heat just a little bit. So I'm just gonna let the meatballs keep cooking and simmer in the sauce until they're totally cooked through. Yep, this has Lad's name written all over it. I'm gonna turn the heat off under the meatballs, and I'll grab the pasta. I'm just keeping it real classic and doing spaghetti. Now sometimes if I'm making spaghetti and meatballs right before serving it, I'll put the noodles on a big platter and then carefully spoon the sauce over. It makes a really great presentation. But I'm just gonna mix the spaghetti and meatballs together in the skillet. Get the meatballs kind of on top. When it comes to comfort food, lasagna is most certainly high on the list of my favorites. But it's not exactly quick and easy, and that's where lasagna skillets come in. It's a great way to get all the elements of a great lasagna, but in so much less time. So I'm gonna make a pesto chicken lasagna skillet. It is absolutely stunning and so, so comforting. I've been sauteing some thinly sliced onion with garlic in a little butter and oil, and I'm gonna move on with the sauce for the lasagna skillet. And I'm gonna whip out the store-bought pesto. I'm actually gonna add about 2/3 of a cup or so. I want this to be pretty saucy and rich. So I'm also gonna add the same amount of white wine. I mean, white wine and pesto, sign me up, no matter what the dish is. So the pan's pretty hot and it's already kind of reducing a little bit. So I'm gonna add some heavy cream. Any kind of lasagna that has chicken and a cream sauce to me is just divine. Very, very comforting. And I'm gonna add some rotisserie chicken. That's part of what makes this pesto chicken lasagna so easy. I'm also adding some canned artichoke hearts that I chopped. And this is a good time to add some salt and pepper. And then quite a bit of Parmesan, which will add amazing flavor and also kind of thicken the sauce just a little bit. A lot of times I'll add spinach to a lasagna like this, but this time I'm gonna add kale, which is really, really nice. The kale seems to hold up just a little bit better than the spinach during the cooking process, and I just chopped the kale. You can also shave it thin, or you can keep it in larger chunks and just tear big chunks of it if you want to. All right, so now it's time for the lasagna. And I am using lasagna, but I broke it into pieces before I cooked it. And this is part of what makes a lasagna skillet so easy. You just kind of break the lasagna into the boiling water, let it cook, and then you have all of these wonderful chunks of lasagna without having to fuss with all the layers. Now you want to toss it so it's all really mixed together and you don't have any big sections where it's just lasagna or just chicken. So it looks really well mixed to me. And next comes the cheese. And when I say cheese, I mean cheese. I'm adding a bunch of grated mozzarella. I really kind of like this hard mozzarella. It doesn't quite get as watery when it bakes. Okay, so this just needs to go under the broiler for 2 minutes until the cheese is melted and bubbly. Wow, golden and luscious and bubbly around the edges. So you can just dig in and serve, but of course, I love to keep going when it comes to a dish like this. And I have some ricotta cheese, and I'm just doing dollops all over. And I love doing it right when it comes out of the oven, so then it kind of starts to warm the ricotta a little bit. And then I have some pesto. And again, just dollops. You can drizzle it back and forth or just kind of put it near the ricotta. And then I just have a diced fresh tomato, which is just a nice little thing to put on top. So I'm tearing some basil, scattering that all over. It's almost too pretty to serve. Key word being almost. I am serving this. Looks too good. So you can kind of cut it with a knife if you want to, or just kind of get in here with a spoon. This is kind of how I do things. No need to be too neat and orderly. And then you can see this glorious sauce in the bottom of the skillet. Make sure you get that and just kind of spoon it around. Wow, can you believe how fast that was? Lasagna in minutes instead of like 2 hours, which is what the regular stuff takes. All right, I love regular lasagna, but I could make these lasagna skillets every day for the rest of my life, especially if pesto and cream are involved. I'm gonna whip up sour cream noodle bake. It's an old-fashioned recipe. It's real meaty and cheesy, and my husband and kids love it. Now I've got 2.5 pounds of ground beef that's all brown. Now normally I would drain off all the fat after this, but there's hardly any fat to drain, so that's convenient for me. Now into the beef, I'll add 2 cans of just regular tomato sauce. Then I'll add a little salt and pepper. And then just to give it a little kick, I'll add some crushed red pepper, not too much. Okay, now I'm gonna let the sauce simmer. Now I have 1 pound of just regular old egg noodles. They should be ready. So I'll just drain them into a bowl. It's a really great layered dish. Really simple, but still lots of things going on. Okay, now I'll just add some creamy stuff to the noodles. First, about 2.5 cups of just regular cottage cheese. And if you think you don't like cottage cheese, don't worry, you won't even know it's in there, I promise. And then I'll add a good cup of sour cream, some salt and pepper. And then part of what makes this so delicious, I add a good amount of green onions. The green onions just add a really nice tang, a really deep flavor. And because the noodles are hot, it sort of melts the creamy mixture. All right, the creamy mixture is totally coating the noodles. So now it's just about assembling it. I'll start with 1/4 of the noodles. I'm doubling the regular recipe, so I have to keep track of the amounts I have. Just throw about 1/4 in there. That looks good. And I'll smooth them out. And then I'll just ladle 1/4 of the sauce over the noodles. The original sour cream noodle bake recipe calls for just combining all the sauce and all the noodles together, but I really like layering it because it keeps the elements separate. And then every bite you get a little bit of cheese, a little bit of creaminess. It's really nice. And then I'll top this layer with some grated sharp cheddar cheese. And I grated this myself. I like the consistency of cheese you grate yourself rather than the pre-grated stuff. Okay, now on to the next layer. Now I'll top the final layer with more cheese. Okay, now these are all assembled. I'm just gonna let them cool and pop them in the freezer, and then they'll be ready to throw in the oven whenever we want them. For lunch in the Drummond cafeteria today, we're having chicken and noodles. Chicken and noodles is one of my all-time favorite dishes, and it's not to be confused with chicken noodle soup. It's more of a thick chicken stew, so delicious. Now I've boiled a whole chicken, boiled it for about 45 minutes, not too high, just a nice simmer. And now I've been shredding the chicken, picking it off the bone. I've always said if you can boil a whole chicken, you can do most things in life. All right, I got all the chicken off the bones. Now I'll add the chicken later, but for now, I'm gonna take the bones and throw them back into the pot. I'm gonna let the bones simmer for about 20 minutes, and that's gonna make the chicken and noodles extra delicious. Well, it's a typical school day on the ranch. The kids have been outside doing a science project, and now they're doing their math drills. They're gonna be in here for lunch pretty soon, so I'm gonna keep moving forward on the chicken and noodles. The bones have been simmering. I got about as much flavor out of these as I could. Make sure I get them all out. Okay. The great thing about chicken and noodles too is you can sort of make it slowly over the course of a morning. There are a few steps to it, but none of them are difficult or complicated. You just have to have a little time. Now, depending on what's going on, I don't always cook like this on homeschool days. Sometimes we just have peanut butter sandwiches, and sometimes we have leftovers from the night before. But today, it seemed like a good day for chicken and noodles. Okay, I'm just dicing up the carrots and celery. I dice them pretty fine because my kids prefer smaller pieces of veggies. But you can make them big if you like it. You can also use root vegetables, add different vegetables that you have in your fridge. All right, dice the celery. So I've got half an onion, and I'll add that to the pot. And then the carrots and celery go in. This is a really pretty dish too. Lots of bright colors. All right, and then the chicken that I pulled off the bones all goes in. There's a lot of chicken in this dish. This is a whole chicken right here. Okay, about a teaspoon of salt, and then some black pepper. Okay, and then I'll add a half a teaspoon of ground thyme. Great flavor. And then this is something my mom always added, just about a quarter teaspoon of turmeric, also known as turmeric. I never know how to pronounce it. Turmeric is usually for flavor, but I use it in chicken and noodles just for color. It gives it a nice, deep golden color. For some reason, the color just makes the dish taste even more wonderful. All right, now this is gonna cook for another 10 minutes, and then I'll add the noodles, finish it off, and it'll be lunchtime. Now, part of what makes this dish so easy is I use frozen home-style noodles. They're actually the noodles my grandmother used to use. They are so delicious, you wouldn't even know you didn't make them yourself. All right, I'm gonna let the noodles start cooking, and I'm gonna mix up a little bit of a flour paste. I'll add about 1.5 tablespoons of flour to a little bit of water, about 1/2 cup. Now I'll just whisk this until it's really, really smooth. And then I'll just pour it right into the pot. And this is gonna help the sauce thicken a little bit. And that is the important difference between chicken noodle soup and chicken and noodles. I'm just gonna splash in a little bit of half and half, teaspoon or so of parsley. Stir that in. All right, now I'm gonna let this cook for another 15 minutes till it's nice and thick. Dig in, guys.